Hello, everyone, and welcome. Our guest today is Avichai Scher, principal dancer, choreographer, director, and now he's added writing to his list of accolades. Welcome, Avi.
Thank you, Cameron. Thanks for having me.
You've been a ballet dancer in multiple companies, a choreographer, a director of your own company, Avichai Scher and Dancers, and successful in each endeavor. What made you now transition to writing?
And my whole life, I grew up expecting to stay in the dance field forever. And then it kind of came as a surprise to me when, around the last year or so of my choreography work and running my own company, that I started to just really feel this curiosity about other parts of the world that I'd never had the opportunity to explore. I just felt like if I ever wanted to try something else, the longer I waited, the harder it would be. I wanted to do something that I felt like made a difference in the world, but was also creative. And so I went to grad school for journalism. I always loved to write and tell stories. And I loved it. I felt like writing and interviewing people about what they're doing with their lives and learning their story was just really motivating and inspiring. I was doing freelance journalism for a while, so I worked at NBC, and then decided to go back into the nonprofit space as a writer and editor and continue my freelance work writing about dance.
Having been in the world for such a long time in so many capacities, does it make you look at the dance community differently? Do you see it differently? Do you want to ask questions differently?
I mean, I think we're in this place right now where people are questioning the cultures that exist and if they're good or need to be changed, or if they're equitable, or if they're putting people down who don't identify with certain genders or sexualities or things like that. And I think dance is definitely having that moment, and it's interesting to reflect back on some of the experiences I had, some things that I considered were just part of the dance world and that's just how it is, that now I see didn't have to be that way. And some other things in the discourse that I find that people want to talk about but don't really want to reflect on, and things that don't fit so neatly into some of those narratives and that are really hard to change, and what the real causes of some of those things are.
Going on, having had your own company, what do you think makes a dance company successful now versus when you led Avi and Dancers?
It's the digital piece. I mean, when I started my company, it was like people were just sort of figuring out how to be on Twitter and Facebook, and people thought it was sort of really in the know for doing these things at first because it was just not so common then. And now it's not only everyone has to have those things, we have to figure out how to monetize them, how to be different, how to catch people's eyes, and how to really innovate, not just put something up from a performance. And that's only going to stay around and become a greater challenge, and also an interesting one.
You started a company now, but what's something that you would do really differently in this world that we are in presently?
I would think a lot about why I was starting it and for whom. When I did it the first time around, I wanted to try to bring ballet that was, really professional level, like high level, like opera house quality, to a small space where the tickets were affordable and the dancers were sort of up close, because I didn't really think that existed. And people who went to see smaller shows didn't really get to see ballet of that caliber. So that was part of it. But it was also for me to have opportunity as a choreographer to grow and explore and to do things that I wanted to do. And I think that I focused a bit more on the second piece of that and not enough on the bigger picture of it. So I think these days it's just really important, even more with all the social challenges in which art exists, to really think about who you're serving and why, and does your company fill a niche, or is it more for you? And if so, that's a different course that you would take with it than filling a spot in the dance landscape.
Can you talk a little bit about how difficult and what might be different now today in fundraising for a company and how they survive?
Well, for smaller companies, I think it's usually a mix of relying on individual donors and grants, but I really was like 98% through individual donors and not very many grants, and some earned revenue from ticket sales and other things. It was really from individual donors. And I mean, that was partially because grants are so much work. And it was like a long process, and you apply for many, 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 and you don't get most of them. And, with an individual donor, you ask and they say no or they say yes, and it's not that easy. You have to spend a lot of time cultivating them and build relationships that they feel invested. But that's a more pleasant and personal process than spending so much time writing something that you oftentimes don't even get any feedback on. So then thinking about today, foundations that give out money, have seen in the pandemic that the burden that this places on nonprofits of all types, including arts organizations and dance, to put so much application and reporting to make those processes as complicated and difficult and onerous as they are. We've already seen this year so many changes in how foundations are granting, and I think that will continue. And so I think companies today have to continue to make the case for why funding needs to be reformed, because foundations are listening now, and I think that can really change things.
So speaking of monetizing virtual productions, what does virtual programming offer that live performances don't? And do you think it's here to stay?
Well, I'll answer the second part first. Yes, I do think it's here to stay, because I think companies have seen how it can broaden their reach and sort of democratize access to dance in a way that, we always knew could happen, but we didn't really fully explore because we didn't have to. I think what makes it so valuable is that, as a choreographer, I think it's an interesting way to think about creating a piece for video versus for live performance. So it's another way to push yourself to connect with an audience and to express something that you'd like to express. And I think, for better or for worse, we're transitioning towards shorter attention spans. And I think it's an opportunity to embrace that and figure out how can we make something that's artistic and that's valuable in that type of shorter form that hopefully will draw people in who will then be encouraged to see something live that's more of a full evening. I think that's the biggest benefit to companies, is to try and just add another way to be creative, to express themselves, to reach audiences that they didn't have before.
So Avi, in today's world, what qualities and abilities do you think make a total dancer?
The name of the game has been for a long time versatility in a dancer, to be able to do different things and be able to just sort of morph into whatever a choreographer might be asking you to. But so that plays a lot into diversity, because sometimes you'd get the choreographers asking for certain styles of movement that ballet dancers are not inherently trained to do, and there's maybe like one dancer who's happens to be good at that, but maybe should the other dancers be doing that? I don't know. Maybe there's other styles, other dancers who are in companies or groups that are not as well funded, not as well seen, who they should have the opportunity to perform certain types of work and bigger platforms. And so I think, it's important for a dancer to be versatile, but I think more than that, we need to look more broadly at all types of dancers and see if we can sort of mix them together more.
What are some of the lessons that dance organizations have learned during this past year?
Well, this past year has offered so many lessons. Of course, there's been the pandemic and also reckoning with racial justice and social justice issues. So I think we have to look at both of those. One is that live performance is not the only thing that they have to offer. So you have to think about digital, you have to think about performing in unusual spaces. Basically, it all comes down to democratizing access. The Opera House is a sacred, beautiful space, and I don't think that'll go away, but I think there's just, we saw that when we had to, we could push to find other ways to reach audiences. And I think that's really important and will continue to develop even once opera houses are safe to return to. And the other is social justice. I always thought, I support, there should be more diversity in ballet, and that's great. But I think this summer we all realized that's just the beginning. There's a lot more work we have to do to make sure that we are making that happen. And this summer I covered for Dance Magazine one of the social justice protests here in the city that had a group of dancers that joined. And I interviewed most of them just to ask why they were there. Pretty much all the people were dancers of color, which was not great that there weren't more white dancers participating, but the dancers of color said that funding is very Eurocentric, and it's European art forms, it's ballet predominantly and more contemporary, whereas the funding in the college dance syllabi and things like that, elevating really other forms of dance that are more practiced by people of color, more originated by people of color, as a key part of the dance language. And I just think that we need to really listen to that and bring that more to the fore. And I think that involves educating audiences as to, sometimes they think, if I'm watching the ballet, it's like they feel good about that. This is Swan Lake, this is important, this is historical. And we need to give that same status to works from other traditions as well.
Avi, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you for your insight and your voice. And we really, really appreciate that.
No problem.